Hi guys, another video here. This one about perhaps what is sometimes thought of as one of the weirdest of the characteristics of living things, and that is this word right here, homeostasis. Or if we could put it another way, it's kind of the art of keeping things right. In other words, as we had said in our previous videos, it's the ability of an organism to maintain a relatively stable internal environment. And that's what this short video is going to be about. Look at a couple of ways that that can be done, so we can move ahead forward to this and start investigating it and running some labs and looking at it further. So with that, let's really quickly here review from our first video the characteristics of life. That if you're alive, you've got to be made up of one or more cells. We went through some examples of that. You have to grow and develop. That might be minor growth. It may be a single-celled organism developing and making minor changes, or it could be something drastically huge like a redwood tree on the west coast, or even you growing and developing, as we said. This one we're going to save for the last part of the year, this evolution. And it's not one organism, as we said. It's generally a species or a population changing or evolving, adapting over time to aid in survival. We'll look at that in depth. Reproduction, self-explanatory. Remember, that could be either sexual or asexual. You have to have a genetic code in some way, shape, or form centered around DNA, passing on your traits and your directions or instructions. You have to obtain and use energy, either whether you are eating and breaking down that food into energy, or you're photosynthesizing if you're a plant or another photosynthetic organism, and then turn that into energy. Doesn't matter how you do it, as long as you do it. You have to respond to environmental stimuli, what's going on around you. Again, all things can do that, animals, plants, etc. But here's the one we're interested in. Regulate and maintain a stable internal environment. And the nerd term for that is homeostasis. As we said, kind of meaning same. Keep it the same. So to look at it another way, what is homeostasis really? Can we describe it in various ways? And we can. In fact, I Googled the term homeostasis, and this is in fact the very first thing that came up. So I copied and pasted the definition. It sounds nerdy, but the tendency towards a relatively stable equilibrium between interdependent elements, especially as maintained. What does this even mean, Bentley? We're going to try to break that down and look at that in a little less nerdy, a little more understandable manner. And just for giggles, I went on the Google machine under images, and the very first thing, the image that came up, was this general concept, which is kind of interesting as well. So if we look at this, we can actually see that, notice that we think of our control center here in terms of could be our brain, what's making decisions as well. So down here, starting with the numerical steps, essentially something produces a change in one variable. So something happens in or around us. Something has to, some type of neurological system has to detect, these receptors have to detect that change. It senses it. That information then gets sent, and we'll stick to humans here in case of that to keep it easy, sent to a control center. Could be our brain in this case. Our brain then sends signals, or our nervous system will send signals out to what's generally called an effector. Usually some type of gland or system in our body that's going to secrete or send something out. That will then send out the effector will send out some type of signal, which will cause an influence back on that. And I love this image right here, this idea of a seesaw. If we're at homeostasis, notice it's perfectly balanced. But if something happens, it causes an imbalance. We're trying to put signals back to bring this back up into balance. So our bodies and all living things are constantly in this state of flux of going up and down, but we're continuing to do things and have reactions happen to cause this stable setting. So with that in mind, if we go forward here, it really relies on the idea of, as we just saw with those arrows, feedback. And there's two types here we'll look at. The first one is a little confusing, called negative feedback. And here's the nerdy definition right here. The lessening, kind of making it, negating it, making something go away by its own influence. So I tried to put in layman's terms here, essentially something happens, so then something else is going to happen to counteract that original something. And that was just like the seesaw visual we just saw. So the easiest way to look at this, we look at a couple of examples. Body temperature in humans is a great one. Blood glucose levels is another one. So let's go ahead and look at, through a visual, body temperature. Now, normally we have, as we said here, if we start to look at this, we can see normal body temperature we want is 98.6. Or in this case, 37 degrees Celsius. Now let's say something's happening. You're running around, which causes an increase in our body temperature. We're going to have, again, thermoreceptors, which are our nerves and our sensory system will sense that and send a signal to our brain that says, hey, whoa, wait a second here. We're getting a little too hot. This is not good. So that will in turn send an effector, will cause our body to undergo changes. Like, for example, increased sweating. You're going to start to sweat, as you know. That's as a result of a signal from your brain sending that back saying, hey, we got to cool off. This vaso or vasodilation means the opening up of your blood vessels, increasing blood flow to your skin, which will, sort of like air conditioning, will kind of help cool you off. That's why if you're like me, any physical activity, you turn bright red in the face. It might be kind of embarrassing to you, but this right here, that's what's supposed to happen. So as a result, there's our response to that. And so what happens is we get the opposite effect. Our body temperature decreases until we return back to 37 degrees Celsius. Of course, it could go the other way too. We could be outside in the winter and detect that there's a decrease in body temperature. We sense that. Our receptors send out signals to cause our body to undergo changes, and we might do the opposite. We might start to shiver, which increases muscular contractions, gives off heat, kind of like moving around, and vasoconstriction. That's the opposite of up here of vasodilation. That's where our blood vessels will constrict and reduce blood flow, which would cause us to maintain and increase, reduce blood flow and maintain our body heat, which will increase our body temperature. So you can kind of see here that it's pretty interesting that it's just a negative feedback. Something's happening, so we do the negative. We do the opposite. If it's going up, we want to bring it down. If it's going down, we want to bring it up. Kind of a nice thing. A little bit nerdier example with this blood glucose. If we look at in our bodies at all times, we have sugar within our blood. So it's really a system of a couple of organs and structures and chemicals in our body, glucagon and insulin. Here's our liver and the pancreas over here. And what we can see is that if we were to have really high blood sugar, let's say we eat something really sugary, we dump a lot of sugar into our blood, that's going to, our body will sense that. It will cause us to increase insulin production. So our pancreas, we will secrete this hormone. Insulin is present, and that is going to actually, this is kind of interesting, that's going to cause us to allow glucose to be taken out of the blood. The sugar can actually leave our blood and go into our tissue cells, like our muscles especially. That in turn, as a result, if that sugar in our blood drops, that's going to lower our blood sugar, which is great. We've done the opposite. The sugar was high. We've gone through a series of steps, and we have now lowered that blood sugar. We could have, obviously, the opposite effect. What if our blood sugar is too low? That's going to be sensed, and that's going to force our bodies to secrete and release this chemical called glucagon, which what that does is it breaks down stored glycogen in our liver, so it releases glucose out into our bloodstream, which raises our blood sugar. So again, think negative, you think you're doing the opposite. If something's high, we go through some steps to make it low. If something is, in turn, is obviously lower, we go through steps, a series of steps to make it higher. Really a nice system. So we just want to really quickly, that idea of feedback, look at one example of a slightly different type of feedback called positive feedback. And that's the opposite. It can be a little confusing, but that's the opposite of negative, obviously, Bentley. And in this case, what happens, we're going to enhance or amplify or turn up the effect of something. So in essence, something happens, so something else happens in our body to make that original something increase. And the best example of that is contractions when giving birth to a child. So if we go ahead and look at that, let's start off here. This is a nice visual because the steps are numbered. So there's kiddo right there down inside of mom. We can see sitting there. Notice that the baby is so large that it's starting to stretch the cervix in and around the uterus. That sends a signal, that stretching. These nerve impulses get sent up to our hypothalamus. That's going to signal in this pituitary gland up inside of our brain region, going to signal that our pituitary is going to start to release something called OT. Really, bear with my terrible handwriting, something called oxytocin. And what that chemical will do is that is going to be, that chemical signal is going to cause the uterus to start to contract. These muscles lining the uterus will start to contract and squeeze, which ultimately is supposed to long-term going to get that kid out of there. However, here's the crazy part, that those uterine contractions, they increase dilation and they increase the pressure and the stretching here, which, look at this, this is amazing. It causes and it stimulates even more of this oxytocin to be secreted, which this cycle then increases. And we get more contractions. And so it increases, we get more contractions until eventually so many contractions that bada bing, bada boom, kid pops out. That's oversimplified, but generally speaking, you get the idea. So we increase that via feedback. Right. So really, ultimately, all that homeostasis we have to think about is we're looking for reactions and changes within the organism to behaviors and biochemical responses that are going to alter our conditions. And by the way, not just in humans. So really, we're looking for internal balance. Bring your blood sugar up or bring it back down. Bring your body temperature up or bring it back down. Or in the last case, even with positive feedback, let's get this kid out of here. All right, so from here on out, homeostasis, looking for balance, and they can be behaviors, things that you do consciously, or internal physiological responses as well. Hope that helps make sense. Cheers.